All right, hello everyone. My name is Disc, and in this video we have a 23 Halls of Infusion, and for the week cycle we are Tyrannical, Entangling, and Bursting. So I had to do this key quite a few times to finally get it in, and I'm excited that I got this one timed and recorded. I'm running with a new Paladin tank friend that I met just through random queues. And I think as far as Tyrannical dungeons go, this is probably the hardest one when it comes to the requirements of the healer. So I'm really excited that I got this one recorded and that we can look back at it together and kind of analyze what went right, what went wrong, or just some maybe general ideas behind how I approach these fights. So anyway, before we get going, let's flash talents really quickly. So this is going to be a double priest group, which I think is really nice for this place. So I opt to drop my improved mass dispel, and I let the shadow priest take that point, and I put it over into translucent image. And I will say it's always good to try and critique yourself and spells that you're not maximizing. I'm not maximizing this one that well, so work in progress. And then over to the disc side, for a key like this with some really intense healer checks, I am just at the moment favoring Aegis of Wrath and Extended Rapture. I just think this is so great. I think when it comes to what type of spells are most useful to a group and to Mythic Plus, I tend to think absorbs are high on that list. So that's just where we're at right now. And I will say it's been a subject of contention in my comment section, why I'm using Solace over Bright Pupil. And I think I touched on this in my last video, but I want to touch on it again now that I have tried switching over to Bright Pupil just to give it more of a chance. And I just can't do it. So I know Bright Pupil has really nice synergy with 4-piece. I think the upfront heal of Irideus is also a really nice pro for this talent point, but when it comes to Power Word Solace, having an extra spell in your book, which is instant cast for Mythic Plus, I just vote as being a little, kind of like invaluable. And not only is this an instant cast, it affects something that is really, really important to our mechanics, which is Harsh Discipline. And along the same vein, that's why I vote for the instant cast of Star. I just think instant casts for Mythic Plus tend to be, the direction I lean in, and that is about it. So let's go ahead and clip over to the video. All right, so here we go. And in this first pull, you'll notice the dark red is my focus target, the apparatus. The gray nameplates, the defenders, are cleaves, so you want to just steer clear. And a little bit of the behind the scenes of our strategy that we predetermined before we started is I am PI targeting the Ret Paladin. The Shadow Priest is on the Hunter. Excuse me there. And when it comes to Boss 1, we've also strategized our Mass Dispel. So no priest can take all Mass Dispels and not run So you kind of have to divide that responsibility. And I think a common reach for trying to share that responsibility is to alternate. And I just don't think the juice is worth the squeeze there. I think when you alternate, you can get confused and you can get lost and you can overlap. I think it's too much work to worry about alternating. So what I have done with the priest is I said I will take the first Mass Dispel of each phase and you get the rest. So I can preserve most of my mana for healing. He can take care of the mitigation and I will just heal. And then we save mana. So back there we had a small wipe, but you'll notice right there, right below my player model, I have a red cast bar come up for the Expulse. There are a handful of spells that I like to bring out in a weak aura form, spell casts, and the Expulse is one of them. It's just best, in my opinion, if you can see it in a fixed location. so that you can really hone in on when to fear. So that red bar is a fear opportunity. My fear could have prevented that wipe. Shadow Priest fear could have prevented that wipe. Usually with a Paladin in a group, especially 2 Paladins in a group, we don't have missed kicks. But I think we're just having a little bit of a slow start here, which is fine. So focusing on the apparatus. Here goes the Shadow Covenant. Always a good idea to try and pick out execute ranges when you can. Double executes are better than single. And off the top, I'll let you know, hope it's not a spoiler, we only timed this key by 1 fucking second, and it's no thanks to this hunter. He is a standout carry in the group, so if you want to kind of keep an eye on maybe what not to do in a key, just watch the hunter. So he's not using his kicks optimally. Here he has a double bleed on him from standing in cleaves. So where I have my defenders stand out as a gray nameplate so I can monitor their position and my own. If I had to guess, on the hunter's side, all the nameplates are red. He can't really easily tell the difference between which ones are harmful and not. And he's just standing in front of all of them and just totally does not know that mechanic. So as a ranged character, there's really no excuse to be getting hit by multiple cleaves. And here I'm keeping a really close eye for my fear bomb. And there was one just to kind of help out the group on that X-Pulse. You can also fear bomb those beams. It's a great way to kind of prevent some damage. And on that subject, when it comes to primary and secondary roles in a key for anyone, I think we all have to do damage. But like, let's say maybe from the standpoint of our hunter here, I think it's better to kind of keep your mind honed in on a primary focus of bringing your utility and bringing kicks. I think the best keys are timed from people fighting to be the most useful. And although DPS is a really important job of his, this is a small group environment where we all have to pull our weight, or you end up being a carry, you end up making things harder than necessary. So whereas it is my job to heal damage, it's also everyone else's job to prevent damage. And when you're not doing your job to prevent it, you're putting a lot of extra burden on me. And that is not how keys are meant to be played. You're going to be putting the group, you're going to put everyone in a position to fail. And learning to min-max a tune, I kind of think is best done one spell at a time. And here the hunter needs to focus on min-maxing his kick. But I think the hunter in our opening hallway there, our hunter wasn't the only one not playing all the spells in his book. I don't think our priest played his fear either, so I do think in those pulls it's better if I just manage the HPS and let everyone else manage the mitigation. To make a comparison, my fear costs a global. Everyone else's interrupts are off the GCD, so that's my thought on it. Alright, so again, I am taking the Mass Dispel first on each phase, and with Bigwigs, my bar timer, I'm only tracking Static Surge. That is where we want to line up our Shadow Covenants. And I do cast Schism followed by Shadow Covenant. When you lock those spells together, it acts as a really nice little bump of healing, and it's not too hard to time that right after the cast goes off, and that's what I did there. So going into this next static surge, every other we can't have a Shadow Covenant. So this is my Rapture round. So noticing with Grid 2, I'm tracking that darker blue value on my party frames, and I'm replacing shields as they're eaten up, and that is basically just a DPS and healer cooldown. I'm not really giving it to the tank at all. His health is much more stable than the rest of us, so I was just rapturing DPS and the healer. And right there, I made a little bit of a bad play. I cast my Shadow Covenant off of a static surge, and I kind of had to vamp here, but that is just how it goes sometimes in keys. You don't always have perfect plays, and you have to just go with it. So I threw a barrier down, gripped the hunter in, and you may notice, not to interfere with my Bigwig's timer for static surge, I keep my Mass Dispel timer on the enemy nameplate. And I was a little behind on this Shadow Covenant, but thankfully was able to get it out in time. And a Mind Blast followed by 2 deaths topped the party there. So one really nice thing I like about Halls of Infusion is a lot of these bosses are hard, but I kind of look at it as a race to sub 20%. So once you get to execute range, you can pump so much more healing, and it's kind of game over at that point. So it's just a matter of getting to 20%, and you are scot-free. So Dot is refreshed, Harsh Discipline is ramped. This is my Shadow Fiend round. We get a double execute here, and this is also my Mass Dispel. So I'm saving my Harsh Discipline proc for the move. Never a bad idea if it lines up so to hold a Harsh Discipline proc for that move, especially since it's pretty large. And we're back to Rapture, farming that shield value on the DPS and healer only. And for this, I'm just a little bit low, so I paints up myself. I think a lot of times in Tyrannical keys, pain sups are personal defensives. I just rarely think you need them on the tank. I think pain sups on a tank is more of a fortified key type thing. And there we go, boss 1 down, no deaths, we're doing pretty good. And if anyone watches that back, I did kind of miss my second PI. So I do struggle with getting my first PI out, not a problem, but when it comes up again mid-fight is when I often drop it. But I missed my target of the Ret Paladin, but I paired it up with the Hunter, which actually ended up being a little bit better in the end anyway, because that lined up with my Rapture. PI and Rapture is OP. And going down here, the Zealots are definitely my focus target. Ramping Harsh Discipline, ramping Atonements, refresh Dot, Shadow Covenant. And I do kind of think it's user's choice a little bit. I know people play this sequence a little bit differently than I do when it comes to is Schism first or is Shadow Covenant first. I tend to favor casting Schism and locking the global in with Shadow Covenant as a sequence. And I think as long as you play it correctly, you can get a lot of value there. So if you go back and watch the static shocks, or if you watch the frog boss that's upcoming, I will pay close attention to the enemy's cast bar, and I pre-cast my Schism in such a way that it casts after damage has gone out. And then when I lock that global in with Shadow Covenant, it gives a nice little kick of a heal to the party, getting, maximum value off of the backloaded heal of Schism and the front-loaded heal of Shadow Covenant. And then it puts your Shadow Covenant in the more preferential position, getting more value out of it without such a long cast like Schism coming in the middle of it. Hope that makes sense. You'll see me do it on the frog boss too. And fun fact, that frog is actually a dragon. Who knew? So going into this next poll, even on non-fortified is no joke. And we do have a little bit of a problem, and I've already kind of like analyzed this to see, what went wrong. And we just had missed kicks. So the hunter did not kick anything, and the priest only played one of his two options. So just anticipating things to go wrong, I am opening with a Rapture. Rapture's never a bad idea when you have a Pain Sup on cooldown. And again, I could offer my fear here as well, but I think the better thing I can do is just heal. In hindsight though, so I did drop a fear there, but it wasn't optimal, I don't think. I don't think I interrupted anything, so I did play the spell, but not optimally, and that's kind of what happened. So the hunter didn't do anything, I didn't play optimally, the priest did not fear, and the ret paladin did not kick. But just to try and have that never happen again, that red cast bar that I have come up on my screen, I have loaded it in now with that cast that you need to interrupt. It's the elemental focus. You don't want that to get off. It's a fairly long cast, so I've loaded that into my UI so I can try and better use my fear next time and avoid deaths. And I've also added that spell cooldown to their nameplate. So in a key like this where we only time by 1 second, let's think about for a second what my one death there meant. So my death meant the pull itself took a little longer, let's say 1 or 2 seconds. And then my death itself cost 5 on the timer, so now we're at 7 seconds about. And then to get me back up and get back on track, that's another, let's say 10 seconds I'm estimating. So that one death cost almost 20 seconds on the clock. So that's what I mean by utility is all that matters. Utility is what we missed there. And a lack of utility cost us 20 seconds. It wasn't a lack of DPS. It was a lack of utility. So Hunter really needed to play his spells better. I could have played my spells better. Priest could have done better. Ret Paladin could have done better. But so here we go, the frog. You want to open with Shadow Covenant and watch how I time my Schism Shadow Covenant right after the first tick of damage. And I think that's one of the best ways to get full value of the heal of Schism and the heal of Shadow Covenant. And also with these frogs, the best utility you can offer as a priest are fears and tendrils. So never be scared to use those. Here goes a Rapture. Again, this is a cooldown just for myself and the DPS. It covered the entire first attack, and we're also half covered for the next attack. So I run Shadow Covenant here, but without a modifier, so like without Shadow Fiend. And with that eat up mechanic, I try and kind of like circle him. That's a good way to keep him in. A lot of people do align. There's a handful of ways you can do it. As long as they're getting ate up, that's all that matters. So here's my Shadow Fiend as a precast. Schism Shadow Covenant as a precast as well. Everyone is top for the second attack. And we're in the clear. So the only thing that can get you into trouble there is those attacks come pretty quickly in succession. you don't want to get into a cooldown window too early. And for this, I believe I go for Barrier. Nope, I go for Shadow Covenant. So I pre-cast the Shadow Covenant. Paints up myself just because I'm running a little bit low. And I did watch this back. So I'm just circling the frog. The priest was ate up by the little ads. So I do have Rapture back available. Here we go with Rapture. Pre-coding the group. And this is an example where I was a little early and I lost globals. So unlike the first Rapture, where after the attack was over, everyone still had shields, we did not get that there. But it's really not too much of an issue. We have hit execute range. We're doing a lot better. And that was my barrier Q. And boss is pretty much over. I'm just trying to pump and get it down as quickly as possible so we can move on. Alright, and this is a really popular play these days because of how long these pulls take. We just mind soothe all of them and run by. And we have double mind soothe here, so we're kind of tag teaming this job. I'm getting in a quick drink because we have one pull at the end of the hallway and we're going into boss. So I have to drink sometime. I'm trying to get it in now to not waste time on the other side. And in this pull, I think it goes without saying, you have to focus the Proto-Dragon. And when I analyzed this pull back over later, the Hunter was giving all his single target to the Gale Slinger. So when we're talking about min-maxing our spells, we kind of also have to think about how to min-max a pull. And you'll see on the Proto-Dragon's nameplate, I have a timer for when that chill goes out. We ideally don't want to, and we shouldn't have to, non-fortified, but he's not targeting the right person. So just like you have to maximize your individual spells, you have to know how to maximize a pull, and that is a pretty complex subject. But one really easy, point of view is which mob can I attack here that will help us the most? And that would be the dragon. And the hunter is just randomly attacking, wherever his mouse falls. All right, so now we have Frost Lady. And as an opener, the best thing we can do is run our Shadow Covenant and Vampiric Embrace. We want to alternate between Vampiric Embrace, Shadow Fiend, and back to VE. And the instructions for the Shadow Priest is to stagger his in after about 20 seconds. And here comes our first Rapture, but we want to refresh Dot always before Rapture. And I'm focusing primarily on myself and DPS. Tank is bottom of priority. And as this first Rapture ends, it lines up perfectly with our second Shadow Covenant, which should be paired with Shadow Fiend. And this is where things start to fall off because this Shadow Covenant is dry. I do wall. You should wall early. That way you get at least 2 in this fight. And here's a play I really like for this boss. I paints up myself and flash heal others. It's a really good way just to buy a little bit of time for your next Shadow Covenant. And I barrier, and this is where I double cooldown Vampiric Embrace and Shadow Fiend, which means my next Shadow Covenant is also dry. And the problem we ran into there, if you play it back, the Hunter stood outside of my barrier for 9 of the 10 seconds, and he took a lay on hands from one of the Paladins when I needed it. So arguably, if I was playing my spells right, we wouldn't have been in that pinch. But if a defensive barrier is down, you need to be in it, because there is recoil if you're not. And there was another paints up on myself, flash healing the group, just buying a little bit of time for this Shadow Covenant, which is also dry because I doubled up on the last one. And right here, the plan was to Shadow Covenant into my second Rapture, and I just really couldn't catch up. We had a death in the group, I had life. I did have a Radiant Providence I could have used, but a quick res for the win. Not too much of a problem there. And again, Rapture focusing on myself and the DPS. And now I notice Vampiric Embrace has 5 seconds left, so I'm flash healing the group, just buying a little bit of time for my last Vampiric Embrace, and we are in execute range, so we are smooth sailing from here on out. And in hindsight, I noticed my Vampiric Embrace macro with Schism did not trigger, so that's something I'm going to pay attention to in the future. However, being in execute range really saves the pull for us, and we have plenty of HPS to get through it. But if you watch this over again, we really started falling off at my second Shadow Covenant, and that was because I held Shadow Fiend. So I think the best play is don't hold back, Vampiric Embrace the first Shadow Covenant, Fiend the second, back to Vampiric Embrace for the third. You have Raptures in between, you have barriers in between, and I think everything works out a lot better that way, and you don't end up running dry. No one gets low prematurely, but definitely having Paladins in the group, I think, saved it. I do think you should always try and stack your group as strong as you can for that boss. Things like a second Vampiric Embrace, Nature's Vigil from a Druid, the Guardian spell from Shamans. I think things like that only strengthen a group. However, I am really eager to get Rashok's healing trinket. I do not have it yet. I've been farming for it. I think now that I'm getting into these higher keys, I really just want all the help I can get. These healing check bosses are no joke, and yeah. So again, we have a dragon here. You'll notice on his nameplate that 15, 14, 13. That's the countdown to his next attack. And also, if I were to critique myself here, I think this one's not quite as important as the one before, but I was not targeting the dragon. I kind of got lost in the heat of things there, the thick of it. But in a pull like that, we were bound to get 2 anyway. But you definitely want to target the dragon. You want to try and prevent those 2 attacks from going off the best you can. And in this pull, I'm just targeting the humanoids. And with this hallway, it's non-fortified, so it's really not as hard, you know, obviously as a fortified week. It's really, really important to get in good practice of kind of keeping your eyes at the end of the hallway to make sure you're on the right side. So for this lady, we have the inundate on her nameplate. It is really important to see that timer, and we want to open with a rapture. So this is what I really love about extended rapture. It covered the first attack, and it covers the second too. So I really like that. And then I go straight into Shadow Covenant. Although we already had shields out from the previous Rapture, this is also a race to the finish. So we can't hold back on our DPS, and we'll just let our other spells, you know, get us through. It's also a great play here before each inundate goes out to at least use your single shield somewhere. Here's our next Shadow Covenant. Playing a little bit early of the inundate, because the most defensive play on one of those inundates is just to make sure the group has full health first. So similarly, a nice, 200k crit shield on someone is very defensive. So is a full health bar. So we have 7 minutes on boss. We fight to the last second, so buckle up. And we have Rapture coming back available. It's always a great idea, it works out well with timings, to play Rapture the first Tempest Fury of each phase. So I open with Dot, straight into my Rapture. My PI target is the Paladin. And in a case like this, I am on the fence about Extended Rapture, but I coded the group in a second round of shields, mainly for the Pain Sup cooldown reduction, but the Tempest Furies are so far apart here that the shields won't last for the next one. So this is an argument maybe where Extended Rapture is a waste on this boss, but you saw how it was useful on other bosses. But again, talking about pre-casting, we did not have any shields there to soften that second Tempest Fury. The best thing you can do in that case is pre-cast a Mind Blast. So everyone was pre-atoned. I think I cast a Radiance out first to pre-atone everybody. And then as the Tempest Fury was casting, I pre-cast Mind Blast and then flooded a Harsh Discipline proc after that. So that's the best thing you can do to maximize a Disc Priest really, or any healer, is pre-cast. Next. So your output lines up perfectly with the damage that's incoming. So this phase, I was actually really shocked how many kicks we're getting off. I would love to maybe hear Executioner's take on it. I'm sure, I think his must be down. I think he's really good at kicks, but these Inundates are great for your Fear Bomb. So keep an eye on those casts. You see I even have the weak aura showing the countdown of Inundate. And this guy was mind controlled. So I flash heal into Rapture so I get my damage reduction. Yeah, so with Long Rapture, I think it's really great in some scenarios, but there's not really a key where every Rapture needs all, 13 seconds. So you end up having a little bit of loss, but at least it goes into your Pain Sup. And for this, I cast my barrier over there, mainly because the Hunter did not have Fortitude. See that little dot? It means he's missing Fortitude. So I gave those guys the barrier. And there's nothing to attack, but I like to give a couple hots out anyway. I don't know. And keep a close eye on this Ret Paladin here. Getting a little bit too big for his britches. Too big for britches. So thankfully, we have one more battle res. Hunter already used one, of course. And then now the Ret Paladin is trying to throw. So again, that's 5 seconds off the timer. His death makes killing these ads take longer, so let's add a couple more seconds there. To get his res off, I think that's like a 1.5 second cast from the tank. So this is where all of our seconds are lost. And that was a pretty nice use of fear. I interrupted one of the Inundates. So we had some more go off. So another thing, if you want to calculate seconds lost, because those Inundates are getting off, I'm having to heal rather than attack. So if the Paladin was up, they probably wouldn't go off, and I'd be able to just attack which speeds up our timer. Instead, I'm having to heal, making this phase take even longer. So that one death, that's the recoil that I see it has. I go into a Rapture. So this is another huge mistake from the Hunter. He used Lust with a party member dead. So we had a res incoming on him, and he pre-lusted. So if you're a Lust class, you must watch offensive cooldowns in group, and you must watch the party to make sure people are alive. I do know, in hindsight, our tank used a drums for the Rat Paladin. But again, those are seconds lost. You know, these games are timed. Every second counts. And you'll see how close we come to losing this because of all these little mistakes. They add up. You have to aim for high accuracy. You have to aim for utility. So quickly looking at the avoidable damage at the bottom, I'm under 700,000. That's incredibly low. And that doesn't happen by accident. You know, that it takes, you have to really work to stay under 1 million, and I'm under 700,000. So as a tank, I think you have room to gamble, but as a ranged hunter, you should not be over 1 million. A Ret Paladin, I think melee classes are generally higher. They do have it a little harder, but it's not impossible to dodge. He's a little bit high. And then in this dungeon, the tanks end up just taking a lot of the bleed frontals at the top. So there was my Fear Bomb, just to kind of help out. We definitely need it in a group like that, but this is a Hail Mary, 15 seconds on the clock. Typically I'd open with Rapture, remember? But I abandoned that. I'm like, oh god, I have to get this Shadow Fiend out, I have to pump DPS. And we did it with 1 second to go. So I think this is a pretty good example of some of these tyrannical bosses and how to approach them. I think, you know, if you watch them back, you'll see maybe where I could have done a little bit better, or where I highlighted maybe my mistakes, or where I was hesitating. But I think this is a pretty good key, and a pretty hard key to get through, but we did fairly well overall with the Hunter as a hard carry. He's a full 30k DPS behind the other two, which is not good. His kicks are really low, which is not good. His avoidable damage is really high, which is not good. It's just not a good place to be, and he really burdened the group. But anyway, looking at the avoidables again, I'm right under 700,000, which is great. I don't pull up any of my details profiles, so I'm sorry about that. But for damage overall, I'm right at 36,000, which is pretty good. With this spec, I try and have a benchmark of 40,000, but there is a lot of single target fighting here, and we did not have a clean run, which also affects your DPS numbers. And yeah, so I would like to say again, thank you everyone for tuning in. I really appreciate the interactions and the community every week. I have gone ahead and refreshed and updated all of my weak aura packs on my Wago. So if you use any of mine, check and see if yours is current. I am really excited to see how the change to barrier goes next week, so stay tuned for that. And again, thank you everyone for watching, and until next time, Disc.